One of the most legendary military victories in history was decided by wet dirt. For centuries, the armored knight was the undisputed tank of the medieval battlefield. Covered in gleaming steel, they were wealthy, aristocratic, and virtually invincible. But on a cold October morning in 1415, the rules of war were violently rewritten. The flower of French nobility was completely annihilated by a desperate mob of sick, starving peasants. A brutal irony. It happened at a muddy choke point called Agincourt. King Henry V of England was retreating, his tiny army devastated by dysentery and exhaustion. Blocking his path to the sea was a massive French army, outnumbering the English by nearly 5-1. The French force was a shimmering wall of elite aristocrats, hungry for glory and ransom. The English were so certain of their impending massacre that soldiers spent the night confessing their sins and preparing for death. Tears in the rain. But the French made a catastrophic miscalculation based purely on ego. They chose to trap the English in a narrow, freshly plowed agricultural field between two dense forests. What they ignored was the torrential rain that had poured relentlessly through the night. As dawn broke, the overconfident French cavalry launched their massive charge. Thousands of hooves thundered toward the exhausted English lines. But the moment they hit the freshly plowed, rain-soaked field, the earth simply gave way. The hundreds of pounds of expensive plate armor instantly transformed from ultimate protection into a lethal anchor. The most expensive and elite military force in all of Europe was completely neutralized by a few inches of sticky clay. The charge dies. Then, the English sky turned black. 7,000 English longbowmen released their bowstrings in perfect, deadly unison. A terrifying storm of steel-tippled bodkin arrows rained down upon the trapped French knights. Because the French were stuck in the mud, they could not maneuver, dodge, or retreat from the lethal downpour. It was a medieval meat grinder, and the aristocrats were trapped like fish in a barrel, completely at the mercy of the peasantry. Steel meets mud. Absolute panic shattered the French lines. The narrow battlefield created a horrific bottleneck of men and beasts. Knights who fell from their horses found themselves physically unable to stand back up. Tragically, many of France's greatest lords didn't die by the sword, but literally drowned in inches of mud. The fleeing men in the front were violently trampled by their own eager comrades, still charging from the rear. The aristocracy falls. The English peasants seized their moment. Out of arrows, they abandoned their positions and waded directly into the trapped, helpless French nobility. The slaughter that followed was intimately brutal. English peasants wielding lead mallets, axes, and daggers swarmed the trapped aristocrats. The heavy plate armor meant to make the knights invincible now made them entirely helpless. There was no grand swordplay, no chivalric romance, just the suffocating, desperate struggle in the muck. The greatest lords of France were literally beaten to death by men they considered barely human. The myth shattered. Then, King Henry made a ruthless decision. In medieval warfare, wealthy nobles were usually captured alive to be ransomed for fortunes. But seeing a potential French counterattack rallying in the distance, Henry panicked. He ordered his men to instantly execute the thousands of unarmed aristocratic prisoners they had just taken. It was the ultimate violation of the chivalric code, a mechanized, cold-blooded slaughter of the elite. Chivalry dies. The remaining French army watched in absolute horror. Their spirit completely broken by the mud and the massacre, the third French line turned and fled. The impossible victory was now complete. A ragged, starving band of sick commoners had utterly destroyed the invincible myth of the armored knight. The romantic age of chivalric warfare literally drowned in the suffocating mud of Agincourt. The final casualty numbers were utterly absurd. Over 6,000 Frenchmen lay dead in the mud, compared to barely a few hundred English. The mud of Agincourt permanently altered the trajectory of human warfare. For centuries, the aristocracy held total power because they held a monopoly on military violence. Armor, war horses, and lifelong training were insanely expensive. But Agincourt proved that a cheap piece of carved yew wood could instantly pierce a fortune in steel. Monarchs quickly realized they no longer needed arrogant, uncontrollable noblemen to win their wars. The crown shifts. The age of chivalry was officially dead. War was no longer a gentleman's game of capture, ransom, and honor. It evolved into a brutal, mechanized slaughter of total annihilation. By destroying the military power of the nobility, European kings centralized their own absolute power. The rise of the common soldier at Agincourt paved the way for the ultimate equalizer just on the horizon: gunpowder. The future arrives. The butterfly flapped its wings in the mud. The modern political nation-state was forged in that bloody, freezing French clay. And it all happened because the most expensive army in the world forgot to check the weather. It is the ultimate proof that nature always holds the final veto over human arrogance. The rain washes it away. We want your historical perspective. What do you think about King Henry's brutal decision? Would you have executed the prisoners to secure the victory, or risked losing everything to keep your honor? Let us know in the comments below, and tell us what weird historical mystery we should investigate next.